Her father gave her to a giant cowboy because she was ugly. That's what the town whispered as they watched her ride off behind the biggest man they'd ever seen. No kiss, no tear. Just a debt paid with a daughter no one wanted. But the cowboy didn't raise his voice, didn't touch his gun. He gave her a room, made her supper, and let her choose if she wanted to stay. What folks didn't know was the land she stood on held more than cattlelite, held a secret sealed in an old tribal deed, and the man trying to take it had friends, with stars on their chests and lies in their hands. But this girl, the one they laughed at, had fire in her spirit and a voice no one expected. When mercy is tested and the land's future rides on one woman's courage, will the one they gave away be the one who saves them all? Your reactions remind me why these stories matter. If you still believe in the quiet power of love, justice, and truth, then you're part of the reason I keep sharing them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty yard as Miriam scattered feed for the chickens. Her worn boots scuffed against patches of dry grass, the tin cup in her hand nearly empty. A few persistent hens pecked around her feet, their soft clucks a familiar comfort in the quiet dawn. Miriam. Her father's voice cracked like a whip. Get in here now. She froze, the remaining feed slipping through her fingers. Eustace Quince stood in the doorway of their modest home, his face set in hard lines she knew too well. The chickens scattered as she hurried toward the house, her heart drumming against her ribs. Pack your things, he ordered before she could cross the threshold, and don't ask questions. Miriam's throat tightened. The house, are we losing it? Did I say ask questions? Eustace's voice held no warmth. Lone man's coming at noon. It's time to settle it once and for all. In her small room, Miriam's hands trembled as she pulled her mother's old carpet bag from beneath the bed. She folded her 2 dresses, nightgown, and spare apron with careful precision. The drawing pad and pencils, her secret treasures, she wrapped in her shawl. Her fingers brushed the rough scar on her upper lip, a habit born of anxiety. The sound of hoofbeats drew her to the window. A massive black horse appeared through the heat waves rising from the earth, carrying an equally imposing rider. The man, who dismounted, moved with deliberate grace despite his size, ducking his head to clear the doorframe as Eustace ushered him inside. Miriam pressed herself against the wall beside her door, straining to hear the men's voices. Mallory, her father was saying, you've come about the loan. That I have. The stranger's voice was deep but gentle, like distant thunder. Got no cash, Eustace said. Got no cattle worth speaking of. But I got something else might interest. You. Silence stretched between the men. Miriam's heart pounded so hard she feared they might hear it. My daughter Eustace continued. 19 years old. Healthy. Knows her way around a kitchen and garden. Cancel the debt, and she's yours. The floorboards creaked under heavy boots. Girl's not property to trade, the stranger, Mallory said quietly. She's my blood to do with as I please, Eustace snapped. You want your money or not? More silence. Then I'll take your offer, but not your terms. She'll come as a free woman. Choose to stay or go as she pleases, Miriam. Her father's shout made her jump. Get out here. She clutched her carpet bag and stepped into the main room. The stranger filled the space like a mountain fills a valley. His eyes, when they met hers, were surprisingly kind. You've got an hour, Eustace said. Be ready to ride. The hour passed in a blur. Miriam added her mother's Bible to her bag, along with the tin of peppermint drops she'd been saving. She changed into her best dress, faded blue calico, and tied back her dark hair with a ribbon. The whole time, her mind spun like a wagon wheel in mud. Unable to gain purchase on what was happening, the big man Beau Mallory. She'd heard her father call him, waited patiently by his horse. He took her bag without comment and secured it behind the saddle. Then he offered his hand, broad and calloused, to help her mount behind him. Eustace didn't come out to say goodbye. They rode in silence as the sun climbed higher. Miriam held herself stiff, trying to keep space between them while staying balanced. The horse's steady gait and the rhythmic creak of leather filled the quiet afternoon. After what felt like hours, Beau spoke. There's a creek ahead. We'll rest. The horse's voice rumbled through his back into her chest. She nodded, though he couldn't see it. At the creek, he helped her down with those same careful hands. While the horse drank, Bo filled a tin cup with water and offered it to her. "You're not property," he said simply. "Not to your father, not to me. You'll have your own room at my place. Lock on the door. Stay or go as you choose." Shh. Miriam's fingers tightened around the cup. She tried to speak, but no words came. "You don't know me," he continued. "Got no cause to trust me yet, but I aim to prove worthy of it." They rode on as afternoon settled into evening. The landscape changed, becoming more wooded. Finally, a small cabin appeared among the trees. Smoke. Rising from its stone chimney. "Home," Bo said quietly. It was a simple place-a-line, shack expanded with skill and care. A vegetable garden grew beside it, and chickens scratched in a fenced yard. Helped her down and carried her bag inside. The cabin was clean and orderly. A cook stove sat along one wall, its warming shelf holding 2 bowls of beans and a pan of cornbread. 2 doors led off the main room. "Your room's on the right," Bo said. "Mine's left. Locks sound. Supper's ready when you are." Miriam slipped into her room, closing the door behind her. It was small, but comfortable, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window looking out on the garden. She sat on the bed, fingers tracing the neat patchwork quilt, tried to make sense of the day. Her father had sold Herno, traded her like a head of cattle. But this giant of a man treated her with more gentleness than she'd known in years. The lock on her door spoke volumes. She wasn't a prisoner. When she emerged, Bo had set the table. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the clink of spoons and the settling of the cabin's timbers. The beans were well seasoned, the cornbread fresh and warm. "Thank you," Miriam whispered when she finished. They were the first words she'd spoken since leaving home. Bo nodded, his eyes kind. "Welcome." That night, behind her locked door, Miriam lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home. An owl called in the distance. The wind whispered through pine needles. And somewhere beyond her window, a coyote's lonely song echoed across the darkened land. She touched her scarred lip, thinking of all the times her father had called her ugly, had treated her as a burden to be endured. Yet this stranger, this quiet giant of a man, had looked at her and seen a person worthy of respect. Tomorrow would bring what it would. But tonight, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Miriam felt something like hope. The morning sun crept through Miriam's window, painting golden squares on the rough wooden floor. For a moment she lay still, disoriented by the unfamiliar bed and the quiet that wrapped around her like a blanket. No shouting, no demands, just the distant song of meadowlarks and the soft whisper of pine needles in the breeze. The scent of coffee drew her from beneath the patchwork quilt. She dressed carefully in her everyday dress, smoothing the worn fabric with trembling hands. When she finally worked up the courage to unlock her door and step into the main room, she found the cabin empty, but far from abandoned. A pot of coffee sat warming on the stove, and beside it, a plate held 2 biscuits with a dollop of honey. A note in careful writing sat propped against the coffee pot. "Working with horses. Help yourself." Miriam sat at the table, marveling at the simple kindness of a warm breakfast waiting. Through the window, she could see Bo in the distance, a tall figure moving with patient grace among the horses in the corral. After washing her breakfast dishes, she allowed herself to explore the cabin more fully in the daylight. The main room was spare but thoughtfully arranged. A shelf held a dozen books, more than she'd ever seen in one place outside a church. Her fingers traced their spines. A Bible, books about horses and cattle, a few well-worn novels. On the table, partially hidden beneath a stack of papers, lay a sketch pad, much like her own. She didn't dare open it, but its presence intrigued her. The sound of boots on the porch announced Bo's return. He ducked through the doorway, nodded a greeting, and went straight to work on a broken gate he'd brought in. Miriam watched from the corner of her eye as his large hands moved with surprising delicacy, planing wood and fitting pieces together. "Thought you might like to see the land," he said after a while, his voice gentle. "If you're of a mind to." Miriam nodded, following him outside. The summer heat wrapped around them as Bo pointed out the boundaries of his property. They walked past cattle fences that stretched into the distance, their posts standing straight and true against the sky. A dry creek bed wound through a stand of cottonwoods, and Bo explained how it would flow again when the rains came. And here, he said, gesturing to a patch of green near the house, is something that needs tending. Previous owner started an herb garden, but I ain't got the knowledge for it. Miriam stepped closer, her eyes widening as she recognized the plants. That's yarrow, she said softly, touching the feathery leaves. Good for fever and wounds, and there's horehound for coughs. And she stopped, suddenly self-conscious. Bo's expression showed genuine interest. You know these plants? My mother taught me. Before. She trailed off, her hand unconsciously moving to touch her scarred lip. I kept her book of remedies. Knowledge like that's valuable out here. Bo said. Nearest doctor's 2 days' ride. They walked back as the afternoon began to fade. Bo built up the fire while Miriam set the table, falling into an easy rhythm that felt strange in its normalcy. Over a simple supper of salt pork and beans, she gathered her courage. Why did you take me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. When my father offered, Bo set down his fork, considering his words carefully. Saw how he treated you. Saw the fear in your eyes. Weren't right. He paused, his broad shoulders tense. No person should be treated like cattle. You deserved better than that. Miriam studied her plate, skeptical, but touched by his words. Most men wouldn't care. I ain't most men. Bo's voice carried a weight of history. Used to ride with hard men, violent men. Saw what that kind of life does to a soul. He rubbed his palm across his chest, as if touching an old wound. Left it behind. Won't even touch a gun now. The confession hung in the air between them. Outside, the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, and a cool evening breeze carried the sound of crickets through the open window. Wasn't right what your father did, Bo continued after a while, but I reckon some good might come of it if you choose to stay. He met her eyes across the table. That's important, you understand? You'll decide if this becomes your home, not me. Miriam felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening to let in light. For the first time since leaving her father's house, she felt the stirrings of something that might have been hope. This giant of a man who could easily have treated her as the possession her father had intended. Instead, gave her what she'd never had before, the power to choose. They sat in companionable silence as darkness settled over the land. The cabin's shadows grew long, but they didn't feel threatening. Instead, they wrapped around Miriam like a protective cloak. And for the first time in years, she felt truly safe. When she retired to her room that night, she didn't immediately lock the door. She stood for a long moment with her hand on the key, listening to Bo's quiet movements in the main room as he banked the fire for the night. Finally, she turned the key. It's not out of fear, but because she could, because this man had given her the choice. Had seen her not as property to be owned, but as a person worthy of respect. Through her window, she could see the stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky. They seemed brighter here, away from her father's house, as if they too were celebrating her newfound freedom. The days began to settle into a gentle rhythm at Bo's homestead. Each morning Miriam woke to find the coffee already made, wisps of steam curling from the pot like morning mist rising from the valley. Bo would be out tending to the horses or mending fences. Giving her space to move about the cabin freely, she found herself falling into familiar tasks, sweeping the wooden floors. Hanging out, washing to dry in the warm summer breeze, preparing simple meals. But here, unlike at her father's house, the work felt different. Bo never demanded or expected. He simply accepted her contributions with quiet gratitude. In the afternoons, Miriam would venture to the herb garden, notebook in hand. She sketched the plants with careful detail: yarrows, delicate leaves, horehound's fuzzy stems, the purple spikes of echinacea. Her mother's teachings came back to her as she worked, memories as clear as the ink lines on paper. Bo would sometimes pause in his work to watch her draw, though he never interrupted. She caught him once, standing at a respectful distance, his expression soft with something that might have been admiration. After a week had passed, Bo mentioned they needed supplies from town. "Thought you might want to come along," he said over breakfast, careful to make it sound like an invitation rather than an order. Miriam hesitated. She hadn't been to town since before her father's arrangement with Bo, and the thought of facing people made her stomach twist. But the cabin's supplies were running low, and she needed paper for her sketches. "I'll go," she said softly, surprising herself with her own courage. The ride into town took most of the morning. Bo let her use his gentlest mare, a dun-colored horse named Penny, who seemed to sense Miriam's nervousness. They traveled side by side, the horse's hooves raising small clouds of dust from the dry trail. The town was busy with mid-morning traffic wagons, creaking down the main street, children darting between buildings, women gathering at the well, heads turned as Bo and Miriam rode past. She felt the familiar stares, saw lips moving in whispered conversations. Her hand instinctively rose to cover her scarred lip. At the general store, Bo helped her down from her horse with careful hands. The bell above the door announced their entrance, and the storekeeper looked up from his ledger. "Well, if it ain't Bo Mallory," the man said, his eyes sliding from Bo to Miriam. "This must be your girl I've been hearing about." Miriam felt her cheeks burn, but before she could shrink away, Bo's calm voice filled the store. "Her name is Miriam." 3 simple words, spoken quietly, but with unmistakable firmness. The storekeeper blinked, then nodded. "Yes, of course. Welcome, Miss Miriam. What can I help you folks find today?" They gathered their supplies, flour, coffee, sugar, paper for Miriam's sketches. Bo insisted she choose what she needed, watching with approval as she selected quality drawing supplies. The storekeeper's attitude had shifted, and he treated her with careful courtesy as they loaded their purchases. Bo suggested they visit the trading post for some herbs Miriam had mentioned wanting. The trading post sat at the edge of town, a weathered building with strings of dried plants hanging from its porch rafters. Inside, he found an elderly Cherokee woman sorting through bundles of herbs. She looked up as they entered, her dark eyes sharp and knowing. "Welcome," she said, her voice warm and rich. "I am Mrs. Three Feathers." Miriam clutched her sketchbook closer, but Mrs. Three Feathers had already noticed it. "You draw?" she asked, gesturing to the book. "Plants," Miriam answered softly. "Medicinal ones." "May I see?" After a moment's hesitation, Miriam opened her book. Mrs. Three Feathers studied the sketches with genuine interest, her finger tracing the careful lines. "You know their uses," she said. "It wasn't a question. Who taught you?" "My mother," Miriam replied, finding herself drawn into conversation by the woman's gentle manner before she passed. Mrs. Three Feathers nodded, understanding in her eyes. Knowledge of healing plants is sacred knowledge, a gift to be treasured. She pointed to one of Miriam's drawings. "This one we call it U-Wa-Ga-Su-G. You've captured its spirit well." For the next hour, they talked about plants and healing. Mrs. Three Feathers shared stories of remedies passed down through generations. Speaking of each plant as if it were an old friend, Miriam found herself relaxing, drawn out of her shell. By the older woman's warmth and wisdom, Bo stood quietly by the door, a patient presence, letting the women talk. When it was time to leave, Mrs. Three Feathers pressed a bundle of dried herbs into Miriam's hands. "For your collection," she said. "Come back when you can. We have much to share." The ride home was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence. Sun was setting by the time they reached the cabin, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, while Miriam prepared a simple supper. Bo disappeared into his workshop. He returned as she was setting the table, carrying something wrapped. "In a cloth? Made this," he said, unwrapping a small wooden shelf, perfectly sized for her books and sketches. The wood was smooth and golden, the edges carved with a simple but elegant pattern of leaves. Miriam stared at it, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Without thinking, she reached out and touched Bo's arm the first time she had initiated contact between them. "Thank you," she whispered. Bo's expression softened, but he didn't move, letting her withdraw her hand in her own time. Together, they mounted the shelf on the wall near her bedroom door. Her books and sketches fit perfectly, at just the right height for easy reach. That evening, as they sat in their usual places by the fire, something had shifted. The silence between them felt different, not the wary quiet of strangers, but the peaceful stillness of two people beginning to understand each other. Miriam opened her sketchbook to a fresh page and began drawing the shelf, complete with its carved leaves. Every few minutes, she glanced at Beau, who sat mending a bridle, his large hands working with surprising delicacy. For the first time since leaving her father's house, she felt not just safe, but truly seen for who she was. The next morning dawned with heavy clouds gathering on the horizon. Beau was checking the mail pouch when Miriam saw his shoulders stiffen. The yellow telegram paper crackled in his large hands as he read, his expression growing darker with each line. "Everything all right?" Miriam asked, pausing in her task of hanging herbs to dry. Beau folded the telegram carefully, tucking it into his shirt pocket. "We'll talk after supper," he said quietly. "Gotta tend to the north fence first." Throughout the day, Miriam watched him work with unusual intensity, his movements more purposeful than usual. He checked every post along the property line, as if marking their boundaries in his mind. The air felt heavy with more than just the approaching storm. When evening came, they sat down to a simple meal of cornbread and stew. Beau hadn't spoken much, but his silence felt different from his usual peaceful quiet. After they'd finished eating, he pulled out the telegram and smoothed it on the table between them. "Got word from an old friend," he began, his deep voice gentle, despite the tension in his shoulders. "Man named Jed Tollin's been moving through the Strip, claiming old debts on land. He's got the sheriff's cousin working with him at the land office." Miriam's hands twisted in her apron. "What does that mean for us?" "He's trying to file a second lien on this place. Says there's an old debt that wasn't settled." O's jaw tightened. "What?" "It's false as fool's gold, but Tollin's got friends in high places. He's after my land and others, too, from what I hear." The firelight flickered across the walls as Miriam absorbed this news. Her new home, this place where she'd finally begun to feel safe, was being threatened. "Can't you fight it? Might need to ride to Fort Smith? Talk to a proper judge?" Beau rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "But that's 3 days hard ride each way. Would mean leaving you here alone." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Miriam shivered despite the warm evening. The thought of Beau being gone for nearly a week made her stomach clench with anxiety. But the thought of losing their home was worse. Before they could discuss it further, a knock at the door startled them both. Beau rose quickly, his movements cautious, but relaxed when he saw who stood on the porch. Mrs. Three Feathers stepped inside, wrapped in a dark shawl despite the summer heat. "I felt something wasn't right," she said without preamble. "The spirits are unsettled." Beau gestured for her to sit. He felt true Mrs. Three Feathers. Trouble's brewing. The Cherokee woman's sharp eyes took in their concerned faces. "Tell me." As Beau explained about Talon and the false lien, Mrs. Three Feathers listened intently, her expression growing grave. When he finished, she leaned forward. "The original deed," she said. "The one filed through tribal channels before the territory was surveyed. That's what you need." Miriam looked between them, confused. Beau's face had lightened slightly. "It to you," he said quietly. "5 years ago, when I first settled here," Mrs. Three Feathers nodded, "for safekeeping. I remember well." She pulled her shawl tighter as another roll of thunder shook the cabin. "That deed proves this land was legally claimed and recorded before the Strip was opened. Even Tollin's friends can't argue with tribal records." Hope flickered in Miriam's chest, but uncertainty still gnawed at her. "Will it be enough?" "Truth has power," Mrs. Three Feathers said firmly. "But we must be wise in how we use it." She rose, adjusting her shawl. "I'll bring the deed tomorrow. Tonight you both need rest. Changes are coming, like this storm." After she left, Beau and Miriam sat in thoughtful silence. The first fat drops of rain began to hit the roof, and lightning flashed across the darkened windows. The storm that had threatened all day was finally breaking. Miriam stared into the fire, her thoughts churning like the clouds outside. Everything she'd gained in these past weeks, safety, the beginnings of belonging, felt suddenly fragile. Her father had sent her away without a second thought. Would Bo do the same if things got difficult? I don't want to be sent away. Again, she whispered, so quietly she wasn't sure Bo would hear over the rain. But he did. He turned to her, his face grave and gentle in the firelight. You ain't going anywhere, he said firmly, long as breath's in me. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, solid as the cabin's walls. Miriam felt something shift in her heart, a decision falling into place like a key turning in a lock. This was her home now, truly, and she would fight to keep it. Lightning flashed again, illuminating Bao's steady gaze. In that brief, bright moment, Miriam saw in his eyes the same determination she felt growing in her own heart. Whatever talent planned, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, a different kind of energy hummed. Tomorrow would bring Mrs. Three Feathers with the deed, and with it, the beginning of their stand against Talon's schemes. But tonight, in the warmth of the fire and the steady drumming of rain, Miriam knew she had finally found something worth fighting for, not just a place to live, but a true home and someone who saw her worth without condition. The morning air hung thick with dew as Bo prepared for his journey. Miriam stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching him saddle his horse in the pre-dawn darkness. Her shawl wrapped tight against the early chill, she held a small bundle of food she'd prepared for his ride. 2 days, Bo said softly, checking. The cinch one final time? It's 3 at most, if the weather turns? No. He took the bundle from her hands, their fingers brushing briefly. You'll be all right? Miriam nodded, though her heart fluttered with uncertainty. The cattle won't stray far from the creek bed in this heat. I can manage. Bo mounted with practiced ease, his large frame settling into the saddle. If anyone comes, I'll be fine, Miriam assured him, squaring her shoulders. The deed is safe with Mrs. Three Feathers. That's what matters now. The sun hadn't yet crested the horizon when Bo rode out, his figure disappearing into the purple dawn. Miriam watched until she couldn't see him anymore, then turned to face her tasks. The animals needed feeding, and the garden wouldn't tend. Itself, by midday, she had settled into a rhythm, moving between chores with quiet determination. The summer heat pressed down like a heavy blanket, but she kept working. Finding comfort in the routine, the sound of approaching horses broke her concentration. 2 riders approached from the main road, kicking up dust as they neared the cabin. Miriam's hands trembled as she set down her garden tools. She forced herself to stand, straight and tall. The first rider was a well-dressed man with a neat mustache and expensive boots. The second wore a sheriff's badge. Neither bothered to dismount. Well, what have we here? The well-dressed man's voice dripped with false charm. You must be Mallory's housekeeper. His eyes lingered on her scar, his smile turning cruel. Miriam Quince, she said, proud that her voice remained steady. This is my home. The man laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. I'm Jed Tollin, miss, and I'm afraid you're mistaken. This property is subject to a legal dispute. Pulled a paper from his coat. Where's Mallory hiding? Mr. Mallory's away on business. Miriam lifted her chin. And we're aware of your false lien, Mr. Tolland. The sheriff shifted in his saddle. Now see here, girl, I see plenty. Miriam cut in, surprising herself with her boldness. I see 2 men trying to steal honest folks' land with forged papers. And I see neither of you has business being here without Mr. Mallory present. Tolland's facade of charm vanished. Listen carefully, you ugly little thing. This land will be mine, one way or another. Mallory's tribal deed won't stand against proper territory law. Best pack your things now. Save yourself the humiliation later. Miriam's hands clenched at her sides, but she didn't flinch. We'll see you in court, mister. Talland, now kindly remove yourself from our property. The men rode away, Talland's threats hanging in the air like storm clouds. Once they were gone, Miriam's legs shook so badly she had to sit on the porch steps. But beneath her fear, a fierce pride burned. She hadn't backed down. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, Miriam wrote a letter to Bo by lamplight. Her hand was steady as she detailed Tolland's visit, careful to include every word exchanged. When she finished, She sealed it carefully. A messenger. Ryder from the post station came by at dusk, as he did most evenings. Miriam paid him extra to ensure the letter reached Bo quickly. As she watched the rider disappear into the growing darkness, she heard familiar footsteps approaching from the herb garden path. Mrs. Three Feathers appeared, her arms full of fresh herbs. "I thought you might welcome some company tonight," she said, her dark eyes knowing. Miriam felt tears well up, but blinked them away. They came today, Tolland and the sheriff. The older woman nodded, setting her herbs on the porch. "I know. The birds were restless all morning. Come, let's put these herbs to good use while you tell me everything." Inside the cabin, they worked together by lamplight, sorting and preparing herbs for Miriam's healing salves. As they worked, Miriam recounted the confrontation. Mrs. Three Feathers listened quietly, her skilled hands never stopping their methodical movement. "You showed courage today," she said, when Miriam finished. "Standing your ground without raising your voice, that takes real strength." "I was terrified," Miriam admitted, crushing dried yarrow with more force than necessary. "Courage isn't about not feeling fear," Mrs. Three Feathers replied. "It's about choosing to stand firm despite it." She examined a jar of finished salve, holding it up to the light. "This is good work. I can sell these in town for you. People know the value of proper healing herbs, no matter who makes them." They worked late into the night, the familiar tasks soothing Miriam's rattled nerves. When Mrs. Three Feathers left, she carried several jars of carefully prepared salves, promising to return the next day. The second day passed more quietly. Miriam kept busy, but her eyes often strayed to the road. Watching for Bo's return, Mrs. Three Feathers visited again, bringing news that she'd already sold 2 of Miriam's salves in town. On the third evening, just as Miriam was beginning to worry, she heard the welcome sound of hoofbeats. Bo rode in as the sun was setting, looking tired but relieved to be home. Miriam met him at the barn, helping him unsaddle his horse. In the warm lamplight, she told him about Tolland's visit, watching his face darken with each detail. Bo's hands stilled on the saddle straps. His eyes flicked to the rifle mounted high on the barn wall, the one he'd sworn never to touch again. For a moment, Miriam saw the struggle play across his features. "We'll beat this," he said finally, his voice rough but determined. "The right way, with the law and the truth, not with violence." He turned to face her fully. "You did right standing up to them. Showed more courage than most men I know." Miriam felt warmth bloom in her chest at his words. Together, they walked back to the cabin, where supper waited on the stove. The evening settled around them like a comfortable blanket. And despite the challenges ahead, Miriam felt stronger than she had in days. The rifle stayed on its hooks in the barn, gathering dust. Bo had chosen his path there, and they would walk it together, dignity and truth as their weapons. The days stretched long and golden as summer settled deep into the Cimarron Strip. Morning light found Bo and Miriam sharing quiet breakfasts, their movements around the cabin growing more natural, like a dance they'd known all their lives. The initial awkwardness had faded into something comfortable, something real, one bright morning. Miriam watched from the porch as Bo worked with a young mare, his movements slow and deliberate. He'd promised to teach her proper riding, not just perching sideways on a saddle like she'd done all her life. "A horse knows truth in your seat," Bo explained, helping her mount. His large hands were gentle as he adjusted her posture. "They feel your confidence or your fear." Miriam gripped the reins too tightly at first, but Bo's steady voice helped her relax. "Let your hips move with her stride," he instructed. "That's it. You're a natural." By week's end, Miriam could post a proper trot, her back straight and proud. The freedom of riding astride made her feel like a different person, someone stronger, braver. In return, she shared her knowledge of the land's healing gifts. They walked the meadows together, Miriam pointing out plants most folks overlooked. "Here's yarrow," she said, kneeling to touch the delicate white flowers. "Stops bleeding quick as anything." In this, she indicated a low-growing plant with tiny purple blooms, helps ease chest congestion in winter. Bo listened intently, his eyes following her hands as she demonstrated how to prepare different remedies. He proved an apt student, his large fingers surprisingly nimble with the delicate work. "My ma knew some about herbs," he admitted one afternoon as they gathered plantain leaves. "But she passed before she could teach me proper. Wish she could have met you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Miriam felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away. Their days fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for chores, feeding animals, tending the garden, checking fences. Afternoons brought different tasks each day: herb gathering, writing lessons, mending clothes, or tack. Evenings were for quiet companionship, sometimes reading, sometimes just sitting together on the porch while the sun painted the sky. One particularly hot afternoon found them seeking shade in the cabin. Miriam sat by the window, making neat stitches in one of Bo's work shirts that had torn at the shoulder. Bo cleaned his tack nearby, the familiar smell of saddle soap filling the air. Miriam's fingers worked steadily as her mind wandered. She thought about how different her life was now from just weeks ago, how different she felt. The silence between them was comfortable, but something tugged at her heart, making her brave. "Bo," her voice was soft but steady. "Have you ever been in love before?" His hand stilled on the leather. For a long moment he didn't speak, and Miriam worried she'd overstepped. But when he finally answered, his voice was thoughtful. "I was once." He set aside the saddle and turned to face her. "Back before I swore off guns. There was a girl in Kansas Territory, daughter of a ranch owner I worked for." He paused, considering his words. "But looking back, I reckon I never trusted her enough to show her my true self. My doubts, my fears about the man I was becoming." Miriam's hands had stopped their mending. She watched his face as he continued. "Never thought I could trust anyone that deep." His eyes met hers. Until now. The words settled between them like a physical thing. Miriam's heart thundered in her chest, but she held his gaze. After a moment, she returned to her stitching, though her fingers trembled slightly. That evening, after supper was cleared away, Bo suggested they sit outside. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the dark sky. They sat in their usual spots on the porch steps, but something felt different, expectant, like the air before a storm. "Been thinking," Bo said finally, his voice low and gentle. "About us. About the future." Miriam's hands clasped tightly in her lap. She didn't speak, but turned slightly toward him. "I know how this started," he continued. "Your father's debt, my offer. But that ain't what it is anymore." He shifted, facing her more fully. "These past weeks, watching you bloom here, seeing your strength and your kindness, it's changed everything." A shooting star streaked across the sky, but neither of them noticed. Bo's next words came soft, but clear in the night air. "If I asked you to marry me not because of any debt or obligation, because I want to share my life with you, what would you say?" Miriam's breath caught in her throat. She stared at him, searching his face in the starlight. There was no pity there, no obligation. Honest hope and something deeper, something that made her heart ache with possibility. Her hand moved of its own accord, finding his larger one resting on the step between them. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like they'd been made to fit together. Bo didn't press for an answer, didn't rush the moment. They sat there, under the vast sky, holding hands and watching the stars wheel overhead. When Miriam finally stood to go inside, Bo rose with her, their hands still linked. "Sleep well," he said softly, releasing her fingers with gentle reluctance. Miriam lay awake for hours, her mind full of stars and possibilities. She thought about the girl she'd been just weeks ago, afraid, ashamed, believing herself unworthy of love. She thought about who she was becoming here, with Bo's quiet support and unwavering respect. Morning found her up early, watching the sun paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. She heard Bo's familiar tread behind her and turned to face him. "Yes," she whispered, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I'd be proud to be your wife." The smile that spread across Bo's face was like sunrise itself, warm and full of promise. He reached for her hand and she gave it freely, no longer afraid to be seen, to be loved, to be herself, to be herself. The next days passed in a sweet blur of preparation. The threat of Jed Tollin's claim still loomed, but Bo and Miriam refused to let it overshadow their joy. They decided to marry simply, right there at the homestead where their love had grown. As naturally as the wildflowers in the meadow, Mrs. Three Feathers, touched by their request, agreed to officiate in both Cherokee and English. A blessing in two tongues, she said, her eyes twinkling, for two hearts becoming one. Miriam spent evenings working on her wedding dress, transforming a length of cream-colored muslin with careful stitches, embroidered tiny sprigs of sage, and yarrow along the hem healing plants that had helped bring them together. The dress was simple, but lovely, like their courtship had been. Bo threw himself into readying their home, as if trying to pour all his love into tangible things. He scrubbed the cabin's wooden floors until they gleamed and fixed every loose board and crooked nail. His proudest work was the long wooden bench he built beneath the old cottonwood tree where they would speak their vows, for sitting and watching. Sunsets, he explained, running a hand over the smooth, sanded surface. For years to come, Mrs. Three Feathers visited often, bringing small gifts, dried sage for cleansing the house, a hand-woven blanket in rich earth tones, a string of blue, glass beads that had been her grandmother's. Something borrowed, she said, helping Miriam weave the beads into her hair the morning of the wedding. Something blue. The day dawned clear and bright, with just enough breeze to make the cottonwood leaves dance. A handful of guests gathered. Three Feathers family, dressed in their finest, and the Hendersons from the neighboring ranch, who had been kind to Bo over the years. Miriam stood in her room, heart fluttering. She smoothed her hands over the cream dress, touched the blue beads in her hair. For the first time in her life, she looked in the mirror and didn't see her scar first. She saw a woman loved, a woman choosing her own path. Outside, Bo waited, beneath the cottonwood tree, wearing a clean black shirt and his best denims. His hands, usually so steady, fidgeted with his collar until Mrs. Three Feathers gave him a gentle, knowing smile. When Miriam appeared in the doorway, Bo's breath caught visibly in his chest. She walked barefoot through the meadow grass, wildflowers, brushing her skirts. Prairie larks sang overhead as if nature itself celebrated with them. Mrs. Three Feathers began in Cherokee, her melodic words carrying on the breeze. Though Miriam didn't understand the language, she felt their power ancient and sacred, blessing the land and their union upon it. Then she switched to English, speaking of love's patience, love's courage, love's power to heal and transform. Join hands, she instructed softly. Bo's large hands enveloped Miriam's smaller ones. They both trembled slightly.
Boaz, Mallory, Mrs. Three Feathers said, speak your heart.
Bo's voice was rough with emotion.
Oh, Miriam.
I take you as you are, strong and gentle, healing and whole. Promise to protect your dreams like I protect this land. To listen when you speak and hear what's in your heart. To love you faithful and true, till my last breath leaves me. Tears sparkled in Miriam's eyes as she spoke her own vows. Bo, I choose you freely, with joy and trust. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to share your burdens, and your hopes, to love you with all that I am, all my days. Mrs. Three Feathers bound their joined hands with a length of soft leather. What is bound in love, she said in Cherokee, then English, let no one tear asunder. Bo and Miriam shared their first kiss as husband and wife beneath the cottonwood tree, its leaves applauding overhead. It was gentle, reverenta, promise sealed. The small gathering shared a feast of venison stew, cornbread and wild berry pie. Stories and laughter flowed freely. Even the usually reserved Bo smiled more than anyone had ever seen. As evening approached, the guests departed with final hugs and blessings. Bo turned to his bride with tender solemnity. In one smooth motion, he swept her into his arms. Welcome home, Mrs. Mallory, he whispered, carrying her across the threshold. Inside, the cabin glowed with lamplight. Bo had filled it with fresh cut wildflowers, their sweet scent mixing with wood smoke from the hearth. He set Miriam down gently, but neither moved away. They sat close together by the fire as night deepened, in a touching, but near enough to feel each other's warmth. The flames painted dancing shadows on the walls as they talked softly of everything and nothing, their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future, as midnight approached. Marked by the soft chiming of Beau's old clock, Miriam turned to face him. The firelight caught the blue beads in her hair, making them glow like stars. "You don't need to wait, Beau," she said softly, her voice steady and sure. "I love you." Beau's eyes met hers, full of wonder and devotion. "Then I'll never stop," he replied, and gathered her close at last. Morning sunlight filtered through the cabin's small window, painting warm stripes across the quilted bed. Miriam stirred slowly, aware of Beau's solid presence beside her. His breathing was deep and steady, his arm draped protectively across her waist. For the first time in her life, she felt completely safe, completely cherished. The cabin seemed different this morning. Every familiar object now held new meaning, their shared cups on the shelf, those books next to her sketching materials, their boots paired neatly by the door. What had once been just a shelter now felt sacred, blessed by their union and shared dreams. Beau woke as she slipped from bed, catching her hand and pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "Morning, wife," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep but warm with affection. "Morning, husband," she replied, the words still new and wonderful on her tongue. While Beau tended the horses, Miriam settled at the table with her sketchbook. Her hand moved more freely now, unburdened by old fears. She captured the delicate veins of leaves, the subtle variations in flower petals. Adding notes about their healing properties in her neat script, the morning passed peacefully. Miriam wrote a heartfelt letter to Mrs. Three Feathers, thanking her for the ceremony and the blue beads, which now hung in a place of honor by the window. She was just sealing the envelope when Beau's heavy steps on the porch made her look up. His expression was troubled as he held out an official-looking letter. "From the county court," he said quietly. Miriam's heart tightened as she read. Jed Tolland had not forgotten them. The banker's forged lien was moving forward, and Beau was summoned to appear before the judge in 3 days' time. "We knew this was coming," Beau said, sitting beside her. His large hand covered hers. "We'll face it together." They spent the afternoon preparing. Beau gathered their documentation, the original purchase papers, tax receipts, letters from neighbors testifying too. His improvements on the land, Miriam packed carefully, including her best dress and her portfolio of sketches. "The County Women's Guild meets while court's in session," she explained, sorting through her dried herbs and salves. "I thought maybe I could show them my work." Beau's face softened with pride. "About time folks saw what you can do." They set out early the next morning by wagon, the spring seat creaking beneath them as their horse plodded steadily toward town. The journey felt different from their previous trips. Though anxiety lurked beneath the surface, they drew strength. From each other's presence, the town came into view around midday. Miriam sat straighter as they rolled down the main street, refusing to shrink from the curious stares. Some folks whispered behind their hands, no doubt discussing her scar or speculating about their hasty marriage. But others, the blacksmith, the telegraph operator, even the preacher's wife nodded respectfully as they passed. They stopped first at the general store, where Mrs. Henderson, a rancher's wife they knew, greeted them warmly. "Stay with us tonight," she insisted. "Can't have you sleeping in the wagon, not with court tomorrow." Her kindness brought tears to Miriam's eyes. "We're much obliged," Beau said, his deep voice gentle. The Hendersons' home was modest but welcoming, with a spare room that smelled of lavender and fresh linens. While Beau discussed strategy with Mr. Henderson, Miriam spread her work on the kitchen table, organizing her sketches and arranging her collection of healing salves in neat rows. Mrs. Henderson examined a detailed drawing of yarrow. "These are beautiful, child. The guild ladies will be impressed, especially since half of them have used your remedies already, though they might not know it." Miriam looked up, surprised. Mrs. Three Feathers had been true to her word about selling the salves in town. "The calendula cream fixed Mrs. Peterson's baby's rash right up," Mrs. Henderson continued. "And Sarah Mitchell swears by your willow bark tea for her joints. They'll be glad to put a face to the medicine." That evening, they sat around the Hendersons' table, sharing a hearty meal of chicken and dumplings. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from cattle prices to the summer's rainfall to the latest gossip from back east. For a few hours, Miriam almost forgot about tomorrow's trial, but as she and Bo settled into the narrow guest bed, reality crept back in. What if she began? Bo's finger pressed gently against her lips. No what ifs, he murmured. We've got truth on our side. We've got each other. That's enough. She curled closer, drawing comfort from his solid presence. I love you, Bo Mallory. And I love you, Miriam Mallory. You, Miriam Mallory. They lay quietly, listening to the nighttime sounds of the town, distant piano music from the saloon. The night watchman's boots on the boardwalk, crickets singing in Mrs. Henderson's garden. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight, they were together, strong in their shared faith and commitment. Miriam thought of her sketches, ready to be shown at last. Her medicines prepared with knowledge passed down through generations of healers like Mrs. Three Feathers. Their home. Waiting for them on land, Bo had worked with his own hands. Some things were worth fighting for, worth standing tall and facing judgment. She drifted to sleep with Bo's heartbeat steady beneath her cheek, dreaming of wildflowers and healing herbs, of blue beads catching sunlight, of a future built on love and trust. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it united. The county courthouse loomed before them, its weathered boards bleached gray by countless seasons. Miriam gripped Bo's arm as they climbed the steps, her other hand clutching the leather portfolio containing Mrs. Three Feathers' protected documents. The morning sun cast long shadows across the porch, where several townspeople already gathered, whispering among themselves. Inside, the courtroom smelled of dust and old wood. Wooden benches creaked as people settled in, their boots scraping against the plank floor. Bo and Miriam took their place at the front, while across the aisle, Jed Tolland lounged in his chair with casual arrogance, his fancy vest and watch chain gleaming in the light from tall windows. The sheriff stood near the judge's bench, his face already flushed with either heat or discomfort. When the bailiff called out, "All rise," the room shuffled to its feet as Judge Harrison entered. The old circuit rider's face was weathered as saddle leather, his eyes sharp beneath bushy brows. "Matter of land rights and liens," the judge announced, settling into his chair. "Tolland versus Mallory. Present your case, Mr. Tolland." Jed rose with a flourish, straightening his vest. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of legal documentation." His smile didn't reach his eyes as he approached the bench. "I hold here a notarized document establishing second lien rights on the property in question. The original owner defaulted. And which original owner would that be?" Bo's quiet voice carried clearly through the room. Jed's smile tightened. "Why, the legitimate claim holder, of course, before your unusual acquisition of the property." He turned to face the gallery, playing to his audience. "And speaking of unusual acquisitions, I see you've made another one recently." His gaze settled mockingly on Miriam's scar. "Though I can't imagine what possessed you two, Mr. Tolland." Judge Harrison's voice cracked like a whip. "You will restrict your comments to matters of law." "Of course, Your Honor." Jed bowed slightly, but his smirk remained. "I simply mean to point out that Mr. Mallory's judgment in all matters might be ... questionable. After all, look at the size of him, more beast than man, some might say." "And now living out there with the documentation, Mr. Tolland," the judge interrupted again, more sharply. "Present your evidence or conclude your statement." Jed produced his papers with another flourish, handing them to the clerk. "As you can see, Your Honor, everything is properly notarized. The second lien was filed last month, giving me clear rights to, I object." Miriam's voice surprised even herself with its strength as she stood. Her hands trembled slightly, but her spine was straight as she approached the bench. "Your Honor, I have evidence that contradicts Mr. Tolland's claim." The gallery buzzed with whispers. Jed's face darkened. "Your Honor, surely you won't allow—" "I will allow anyone with relevant evidence to speak," Judge Harrison said firmly. "Proceed, Mrs. Mallory." Miriam opened her portfolio with steady hands. "This is the original deed to the land in question," she said, her voice clear in the sudden silence. "It bears both the tribal seal of the Cherokee Nation and witness marks from the original territory survey."
Ow.
She handed the documents to the clerk.
Ow!
It predates Mr. Tolland's claim by 5 years. The judge examined the papers carefully, holding them up to the light. These appear to be in order. Mrs. Three Feathers mark as witness, I see. She's well known to this court. He looked at Jed. Mr. Tolland, how do you explain the disparity in dates? Jed's confident manner slipped slightly. Your Honor, surely. You won't accept Indian documents over proper bank records. Those Indian documents, as you call them, are legally binding under both territorial and federal law, the judge said coldly, and they appear to invalidate your entire claim. The sheriff stepped forward, his face even redder now. Your Honor, perhaps we should delay judgment until these documents can be properly verified. I've seen enough. Judge Harrison cut him off. The tribal deed is authentic and predates all other claims. Mr. Mallory's ownership is legally sound. He fixed Jed with a stern look. Furthermore, Mr. Tolland, I suggest you examine your documents more carefully in the future. The date on your notarized paper is suspicious unless you're claiming to have filed it on a Sunday when the county office was closed. A murmur ran through the gallery. Jed's face flushed dark with anger. Bo. The judge turned to where Bo stood quietly beside Miriam. You have anything to add? Bo stepped forward, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. Only this, Your Honor, that land was bought fair and square, worked honest, and improved by my own hands. I've paid every tax, honored every boundary, and helped every neighbor who asked. That's all I aim to do. Work my land and live in peace with my wife. His large hand found Miriam's, engulfing it gently. We're not asking for special treatment, just what's rightfully ours. Judge Harrison nodded slowly. Well said, he straightened. In his chair, this court finds in favor of the Mallorys. The purported lien is hereby dismissed. His gavel cracked against the wooden block. Court adjourned. The gallery erupted in movement and whispered conversations. Jed stormed out, shouldering roughly past Bo, who didn't move an inch at the impact. The sheriff followed, his face still burning. Miriam and Bo gathered their papers quietly, aware of the many eyes upon them. As they walked toward the door, the whispers followed them down the aisle. But just before they reached the exit, an elderly woman's voice rose clearly above the murmur. That girl's got backbone. The comment hung in the air for a moment. Then other voices joined in, offering quiet words of approval and respect. Standing up to Talon like that, ... Those drawings of hers heal my Martha's cough. Decent folk, them both. Outside on the courthouse steps, Miriam finally let out the breath she'd been holding. Bo's arm went around her shoulders, strong and steady. You did it, he said softly. She shook her head. We did it together. They walked down the steps into the bright morning, heads high, their shadows merging into one on the sun-warmed boards of the sidewalk. Behind them, the courthouse door opened and closed several times as people emerged. Their conversations now touched with a new tone of respect when speaking of the Mallorys. The land was theirs. Won back through truth and honor, but more than that, Miriam realized, she had won something else today. The right to stand tall, to be seen for who she truly was, not for the scar that marked her face. She had found her voice, and the town had finally heard it. Morning sunlight caught the fresh paint on the wooden sign as Bo lifted it carefully into place. The letters, meticulously drawn by Miriam's steady hand, spelled out Mercy Ranch, all welcome who come in peace, in clean, bold strokes. The sign hung proudly above their door, its presence transforming the simple cabin into something more, a declaration of purpose. Miriam stood back in the yard, shading her eyes against the bright summer sky. Her cream-colored apron caught the breeze, and her dark hair was tied back neatly with a faded blue ribbon. She watched as Bo secured the last nail, his large hands moving with characteristic gentleness despite their strength. There, Bo said, stepping down from the ladder.
I reckon that'll hold through anything short of a tornado.
Miriam walked closer, studying their handiwork. The sign was more than wood and paint. It was a promise. Her fingers traced the letters. From below, not quite touching them. It's perfect. She whispered. Bo's large frame cast a shadow beside her as he gazed up at their creation. His voice was soft, thick with emotion.
Act.
Never thought I'd have peace like this. He bent down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, his lips lingering there for a moment. You brought it here, Miriam. You made this place what it is. She leaned into his solid presence, remembering the frightened girl who'd arrived on horseback just months ago. We both did, she corrected gently. Together. The following days brought a steady stream of visitors to Mercy Ranch. Word spread about Miriam's healing salves, and women from neighboring homesteads began stopping by with their children seeking remedies for summer ailments. Bo built a small shelf near the front door to display her medicines, each jar carefully labeled in her precise handwriting. They worked side by side in the cool mornings, laying out new garden rows. Bo's strong arms turned the earth while Miriam followed behind, planting her precious herbs in neat lines. The soil was rich and dark, promising good things to come. Sometimes passing travelers would stop to rest in the shade of their cottonwood tree, sharing news from distant territories over cups of strong coffee. One particularly warm evening, as the sun painted the sky in deep oranges and purples, they heard the sound of running feet approaching from the road. Bo straightened from where he'd been mending a fence, his eyes alert but not alarmed.
Oh.
Miriam stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. A young Navajo boy appeared around the bend in the road, his clothes dusty and torn, his breath coming in gasps. He couldn't have been more than 12 years old. When he saw them, he froze like a startled deer ready to bolt. It's all right, Miriam called softly, staying very still. You're safe here. The boy's eyes darted between them, taking in Bo's imposing size and Miriam's gentle stance. Behind him, they could hear distant shouts, rough voices calling in anger. Railroad. Men, the boy managed between breaths, they said. Said I stole... ... He swayed slightly on his feet. Bo moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his hands where the boy could see them. You look like you could use some water, son. His voice was calm, steady. We've got plenty to share. Miriam was already moving to the pump, filling a tin cup with cool, clear water. She approached the boy carefully, holding it out like an offering. After a moment's hesitation, he took it, drinking deeply. I'm Miriam, she said softly. Bo, that's our sign up there, see? All are welcome who come in peace. The boy's eyes found the sign, reading it slowly. Some of the tension left his shoulders. Daniel, he whispered. My name is Daniel. The voices were getting closer. Bo's hand touched Miriam's shoulder gently. The barn's open, he said, just loud enough for Daniel to hear. Clean hay in the loft. Might be a good place to rest a while. Understanding flickered in the boy's eyes. He handed the cup back to Miriam and slipped away toward the barn, quick and quiet as a shadow. Moments later, several railroad workers appeared on the road, their faces red with exertion and anger. You seen a thieving Indian boy come this way? One demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. Bo stepped forward, his presence filling the yard. Evening, gentlemen, he said calmly. We've seen plenty of travelers today, most heading north toward the railroad camp. His voice carried no hint of deception, just simple statement of fact. The men shifted uncertainly, eyeing Bo's size. Another worker spat in the dust. Probably ran that way. Come on, we're wasting time here. They moved on, their angry voices fading into the gathering dusk. Miriam released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Bo's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Later, after darkness had fully settled, they brought Daniel bread and stew in the barn. The boy ate carefully, with dignity, despite his obvious hunger. In the lamplight, they could see the bruises on his arms, the fear still lingering in his eyes. Those men, Miriam said softly, they accused you of stealing? Daniel nodded slowly. My sister is sick, he explained. I saw medicine in their camp. Good medicine from the town doctor. I only took a little. His voice dropped to a whisper. But they saw me. Miriam's heart ached. She knew too well what it meant to be desperate, to be judged harshly by those who had never known true need. Where is your sister now? With our aunt. 2 days' walk from here. Daniel's eyes dropped to his empty bowl. I should not have stopped. I need to get back to her. Bo and Miriam exchanged a look in the dim light. Years of unspoken understanding passed between them in that glance. Miriam reached for her medicine bag, which she'd brought with her to the barn. "What kind of sickness does your sister have?" she asked, already sorting through her bottles and pouches, as Daniel described the symptoms. Miriam nodded, selecting several remedies. Her hands moved surely, measuring and mixing with practiced care. Bo watched her work, his eyes soft with pride and something deeper, love, perhaps, or gratitude for how far they'd both come. When she finished, she handed Daniel a carefully wrapped package. "These will help your sister," she said. "And here's food for your journey." She passed him a bundle that Bo had prepared: bread, dried meat, and a small water skin. The boy's eyes went wide. "But ... why would you help me? You don't know me." Miriam felt Bo's warm presence beside her as she answered. "Because someone once helped us," she said simply, "when we needed it most." Later that night, after Daniel had settled into the hayloft, with clean blankets, Miriam and Bo sat together on their porch. The stars wheeled overhead, bright and clear in the summer sky. Crickets sang in the tall grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Miriam's voice was soft in the darkness. "We were given a second chance," she whispered. "Let's give him one too." Bo's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Already done," he murmured. "Reckon that's what this place is becoming. A second chance for folks who need one." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the night deepen around their home. The new sign creaked slightly in a passing breeze, its promise holding true. Mercy Ranch, all welcome who come in peace. It was more than words now. It was a calling, a purpose larger than themselves. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Bo found T already in the barn, feeding the horses. The boy moved with quiet efficiency, his movements careful and precise. He'd shed some of his wariness over the past few days, though his eyes still darted to the road whenever hoofbeats approached. "Mornin'," Bo said softly, not wanting to startle. "Him? Reckon you've got away with horses?" T nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "They know when you respect them," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "My father taught me that." Bull. Bo picked up a coil of wire and some tools. "Got some fence mending to do today. Could use an extra pair of hands if you're willing." "Right." The boy's eyes lit up at the invitation. I followed Bo out to the western pasture, where several fence posts had worked loose in the summer storms. They worked in comfortable silence, Bo demonstrating how to test each post's stability. T learning quickly how to splice the wire just so. Around mid-morning, Miriam brought them water and cornbread. She sat on a nearby rock, watching them work, her sketchbook open in her lap. The scratch of her pencil mingled with the rhythmic sound of their hammering. "My father," T said suddenly, his hand steady on the wire. "He worked the railroad too, said it was good money." He paused, testing the splice. But the white men, they didn't care about safety. Made them work in the rain, on loose ground. Bo's hand stilled on his tools, listening. "The earth gave way," T continued, his voice distant. "Took 3 men with it. My father. After that, Mother said we'd move north, where her people were. But then the railroad men came again. Said we owed money for Father's tools, for his board." Miriam's pencil had stopped moving. Her eyes met Bo's over T's bent head. Sharing a silent understanding of grief and injustice. "Mother told me to run," T said, his voice stronger now. "She knew what they really wanted. Cheap labor to replace the men they'd lost. Said she'd find me when she could." "How long ago was that?" Miriam asked gently. 2 moons. T tied off the wire with precise movements. "I've been moving ever since, looking for my mother's people, but..." He shrugged, the gesture too old for his young shoulders. That evening, after T had gone to sleep in the loft, Miriam sat at the table writing by lamplight. Her pen moved steadily across the paper, pausing only when she needed to gather her thoughts. "What are you working on?" Bo asked, settling into his chair beside her. "A letter to the reservation agency," she replied, not looking up. "The one near?" "Fort Supply." Mrs. Three Feathers mentioned they have a good agent there, a man who actually tries to help people find their kin. Bo read over her shoulder as she wrote, describing T.S.'s situation carefully, emphasizing his youth and his need for protection. She included details about his father's death on the railroad, knowing it might help establish his claim for assistance. "Have a way with words," Bo said softly when she finished. Miriam touched her scar unconsciously. It's an old habit from when she'd been too afraid to speak at all. "Sometimes the right words can build bridges," she said. "Like your fences joining things that need connecting." The reply came 4 days later, carried by a dust-covered rider who'd come from the north. The Apache agent's response was detailed and compassionate. Yes, they would take the boy in. Yes, they would help search for his mother's people. They could send someone within the week. That evening, Bo found tea by the corral, watching the sunset paint the sky in deep reds and purples. The boy had just finished helping repair a broken gate hinge, his hands still smudged with grease. "Got some news today?" Bo said, leaning against the fence. "Found some folks who might be able to help you, good people who work with the Apache agent up north. They're willing to take you in, help you look for your mother's people." Its shoulders tensed slightly. You want me to go?" "No," Bo said firmly. "That ain't it at all. The choice is yours. You can stay here as long as you want. Or you can go with them, try to find your kin. Either way, you'll always have a place here." The boy was quiet for a long moment, watching the horses graze in the failing light. Could I stay? Just a while longer? Long as you want?" Bo repeated, his voice gentle but sure. A smile, the first real one they'd seen, broke across T.S.'s face. "I like it here," he said softly. "It feels safe." Bo finished for him. "That's what we aim for." The next morning, Miriam took the wooden bench Bo had built their mercy bench. She'd taken to calling it, and carefully began carving. Beneath her name and boughs, she added T's, the letters deep and permanent in the solid wood. When the boy saw it later, his fingers traced the letters with wonder. "You put my name with yours?" "Family ain't just blood," Miriam said, her hand finding his shoulder. "It's who you choose to shelter, who you choose to trust." She touched her scar, but this time the gesture wasn't one of shame. It was remembrance of how far she'd come. Sometimes the broken pieces fit together better than the ones that never cracked. The late summer heat pressed down on the town like a heavy blanket as Miriam and Bo made their way up the courthouse steps. A crowd had already gathered, their whispers following the couple like autumn leaves in the wind. The summons had arrived. 3 days ago, Jed Tolland's slander claim against them both. Demanding a town hearing inside, the benches creaked under the weight of what seemed like half the county. Miriam spotted Mrs. Three Feathers near the front, her weathered face calm and steady. Next to her sat the ranching couple who'd given them shelter during the lean hearing. Oh, but there were others, faces twisted with suspicion, who muttered about Indian lovers and troublemakers. Jed Tolland stood at the front, his suit pristine despite the dusty day. "These people," he announced, pointing at Bo and Miriam, "are destroying the natural order of things. They're harboring runaways, encouraging more natives to settle near. Good Christian folk. And when questioned, they spread lies about respectable businessmen, meaning myself." The room stirred uneasily. Miriam felt Bo's hand brush against hers, gentle and reassuring. He hadn't brought his rifle, wouldn't even touch it despite the threats that had been nailed to their door last week. His vow of peace held firm. "What about the safety of our children?" someone called out. "Can't have Indians camping all over. That boy they took in could be anyone's son," another voice added. "Could be stolen." Miriam's hands trembled, but she rose slowly to her feet. The room fell silent, every eye drawn to her face, to the scar that had once made her hide. But now she lifted her chin, meeting their stares directly. "I know what it means to be cast aside," she began, her voice soft but clear. "To be told you're worth less than others because of how you look, or where you come from." Her fingers touched her scar briefly. "This town, many of you watched my father treat me like property to be traded. Only Bo saw me as human." She took a deep breath, drawing strength from Bo's steady presence beside her. "Now you say we're wrong to offer the same mercy to others?" T came to us running from men who worked his father to death, then tried to enslave him to pay imagined debts. He's a child, no different from your own sons and daughters. The law, Jed began, but Miriam's voice grew stronger. The law? She turned to face him. The same law you tried to twist with forged liens. The same law that lets railroad men work people to death without consequence? She addressed the crowd again. This town failed Tia's father, failed his mother, failed every family driven from their land by false papers and false promises. Mrs. Three Feathers nodded slowly, and others began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. We named our home Mercy Ranch because that's what it is, a place where anyone who comes in peace can find rest. Not just natives, not just whites, but anyone who needs shelter and respect. Miriam's voice softened. Isn't that what we all want? A place to belong? A chance to work honest land and live in peace? The elderly woman who'd spoken up for her at the lien hearing stood shakily. Girl's right. My own grandmother told stories of being helped by Cherokee folk when first settling here. Saved her whole family during the winter of 1838. Others began to nod. The rancher's wife spoke up next. Those salves Miriam makes. Fixed my Arthur's back when nothing else would, and that boy of theirs helped round up our stray cattle last week, asked nothing in return. Jed's face had grown red with fury. This is absurd. They're undermining everything we're trying to build here. And what exactly are you building, Mr. Tolland? Miriam asked quietly. A town where only some lives matter? Where mercy is seen as weakness? She looked around the room, meeting eyes that now held more thought than anger. We're not asking anyone to change their ways. We're just asking to be allowed to live ours, to help those who need it, to work our land in peace, to show that different folks can live side by side without fear. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The town judge, who'd been listening silently, cleared his throat. I believe we've heard enough. Mr. Tolland, your claim of slander is dismissed. Mallory's have broken no laws by offering shelter to those in need. The September morning dawned crisp and clear, dew sparkling on the prairie grass like scattered diamonds. Miriam sat at the kitchen table, sorting through her dried herbs, while Bo mended a pair of work gloves near the window. The steady rhythm of their shared silence broke when hoofbeats approached the ranch. A young boy from town, maybe 12 years old, dismounted with an official-looking envelope. From the Women's Guild, ma'am, he said, tipping his hat just like his elders did. They said it was important. Miriam's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. Her eyes widened as she read, and suddenly tears began rolling down her cheeks. The letter dropped to the table as she covered her mouth with both hands. Bo was at her side in an instant, his large hand gentle on her shoulder. What is it, love? Everything all right? She nodded through her tears, pushing the letter toward him. Bo picked it up, reading slowly and carefully. The Women's Guild of the county had written to praise Miriam's courage at the town hearing. They spoke of her wisdom, her gentle strength, and how she'd shown them all a better way forward. I closed. Was a bank draft for $100, seed money, they called it, to help expand her herb practice into a proper healing business. They say, my words changed minds, Miriam whispered in disbelief, that my salves have helped so many families, ... She looked up at Bo, her eyes shining. How can this be real? Bo knelt beside her chair, taking her small hands in his large ones. Because you've changed more lives than you know, Miriam. Every person who comes to our door sees something they didn't expect. Beauty rising from brokenness. Hope wearing a scarred face and speaking truth with gentleness. Outside, meadowlarks called across the autumn air. T was teaching two new young guests, a widow's children staying while their mother recovered from fever, how to properly feed the chickens. Their laughter drifted through the open window. Over the next few weeks, Bo and Miriam worked side by side to build a second cabin. It would be for guests, they decided, those who needed more than just a night's rest. Bo's skilled hands shaped the logs while Miriam planned a small herb garden nearby. The work was hard but satisfying, each beam and board a testament to their shared vision. Mrs. Three Feathers visited often, helping Miriam organize her expanding collection of remedies and teaching her additional healing ways, passed down through generations. The mixing of frontier medicine and native wisdom seemed as natural as the blending of languages around their supper table each evening. One quiet Sunday afternoon, the new cabin's roof finally in place, Miriam and Bo sat together on the mercy bench. The wooden seat had grown crowded with carved names, not just their own and T's anymore, but a growing record of all who'd found shelter at Mercy Ranch. Some stayed a night, others weeks, but each name told a story of grace given and received. Miriam traced the letters of their names with her finger, remembering that first uncertain night when she'd arrived here as a bartered bride, how far they'd come since then. She turned to Bo, her heart so full it felt like it might overflow. "You made me feel beautiful," she said softly, taking his weathered hand in hers. "But more than that, you made me feel seen. Really seen. Maybe for the first time in my life." She squeezed his fingers. "Now others see me too, not just the scar, or the silence, but who I really am." Bo's eyes were warm as summer rain as he looked at her. "I reckon that's what love does. Helps us see ourselves true through another's eyes." He touched her cheek gently. "Once you know you're seen and loved, seems natural to pass that gift along to others." Miriam leaned against his shoulder, watching the sun paint the prairie gold. The new cabin stood ready to welcome whoever might need it next. Her herbs dried in neat bundles from the rafters of their home. Here on this bench, carved with the names of the broken and healing, she had become not just a survivor, but something beloved, a healer, a protector, a lighthouse of mercy on the wild frontier. The autumn of 1879 painted the prairie in rich golds and deep purples. Mercy Ranch had grown from a simple homestead into a beacon of hope along the Cimarron Strip. The original cabin still stood proud, but now additional buildings dotted the landscape like a small village. The guest cabin, a storage shed, and the nearly finished chapel that Bo worked on, whenever time allowed, in the flourishing herb garden. Children's laughter rang out as they helped Miriam harvest the last of the summer sage. Little Sarah, whose mother had stayed with them while fleeing. A cruel husband carefully placed dried stems into woven baskets. Next to her, 2 stars, a Cherokee boy recovering from fever, showed her how to tie the bundles just as Miriam had taught him. Smoke curled from the main cabin's chimney, carrying the rich scent of fry bread and stewing meat. Navajo woman who had arrived in spring stirred a pot of her grandmother's medicine soup. She had chosen to stay on as helper and friend, her quiet wisdom complementing Miriam's growing confidence as a healer. Bo's massive frame cast long shadows. As he worked on the chapel's entrance, his hands still powerful but ever gentle, shaped wood into welcome. The small building wasn't meant for any particular faith, just a quiet place where weary souls could find peace. Mrs. Three Feathers had blessed the foundation stones with sage and prayer, and traveling preachers sometimes stopped to offer words of hope inside the main cabin at the sturdy table. Bo had built in those first uncertain days. Miriam bent over a leather-bound journal. Her pen moved steadily across the pages as she recorded their story, not just hers and Bo's, but the tales of all who had found refuge at Mercy Ranch. The scar on her lip, once a mark of shame, now curved slightly when she smiled, which was often these days. She wrote of that first night of fear giving way to trust, of Bo's patient kindness and her own journey from silence to strength. The pages filled with stories of those who had passed through, runaway brides, lost children, broken men seeking redemption. Some stayed a night, others months, all found mercy. As evening approached, Bo washed up and settled into his favorite chair on the porch. Miriam joined him, her sketchbook and pencils in hand. The cottonwood tree that had witnessed their wedding now spread broad branches over the yard, its leaves whispering in the cooling air. Bo pulled out the worn Bible, its pages soft from daily handling. His deep voice carried across the peaceful scene as he read from the Book of Ruth, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay." Miriam's pencil moved across paper, capturing the way shadow and light played on the chapel's new walls. In her drawing, the building seemed to glow with inner warmth. Just as their home did T, no longer the scared boy who had first sought shelter in their barn, led the horses in from pasture. Now 15, he moved with quiet confidence. his English and Cherokee mixing easily with his native Navajo as he spoke to the animals. He had chosen to stay, becoming as much their son as if he'd been born to them. The sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and deep purples when dust rose on the horizon. A wagon approached slowly, bearing what looked like a family, tired, uncertain, much like Miriam herself had been that day long ago. Doe set down his Bible and stood, his movements unhurried and welcoming. The old sign still hung above the main gate, Mercy Ranch, all welcome who come in peace.
Hey!
The paint had weathered some, but the words remained clear and true. Bo walked out to meet the wagon as it drew to a stop. A man with weary eyes and 3 small children huddled close to their mother looked down at him, hope warring with fear on their faces. "Welcome to Mercy Ranch," Bo said, his voice warm and steady. "You're safe here." Miriam watched from the porch. As the family climbed down from their wagon, saw the mother's shoulders relax at Bo's words. Another story beginning, another chance for Grace to work its quiet magic. She smiled. Touching the journal in her lap where their own story lay written in ink and love, the sun set over Mercy Ranch, painting everything in soft gold, the chapel rising toward heaven, children helping tea with the horses, Nasha stepping out to offer warm bread to the newcomers, here in this place of second chances. 2 souls once discarded by the world had found not just each other, but their true calling, offering refuge to all who came seeking mercy. Thanks for watching. Stories like this shape us in ways we don't always expect. Something resonated. Subscribe. I'm back tomorrow with another one worth hearing.